Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer. I make guides and discussion videos about games I like. Today, I want to share with you my thoughts on the alpha demo of the upcoming PC tactical RPG, Shadow of the Road. Shadow of the Road is set at the end of the Edo period of Japan, during the final days of the Tokugawa shogunate, but has added fantasy and steampunk elements. You control a party of characters. In the demo it was 4 by the end, but there may possibly be more in the full game. I got a key for the closed alpha from Owlcat Games, so I got to play it early. At this point, however, if you're interested in the gameplay you see, you're actually able to participate in the open alpha for Shadow of the Road, which started on March 25th. I'm not sure how long this open alpha will last, so if you're interested, take a look sooner rather than later. I'll have the link to the Steam page in the description if you want to play it and see how you personally feel about the game. I highly recommend you play it yourself because you may have different preferences and possibly a different experience of the game than me. Owlcat Games are the publisher of Shadow of the Road. You may know them from the Pathfinder series and Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, which they developed, but now they're also branching out into publishing games. So far, I am loving the projects they've chosen to support, this one and Rue Valley, which is an RPG that has Disco Elysium vibes. I checked that one out a while ago and it looks incredibly promising. The developer of Shadow of the Road is Another Angle. As far as I can see, they're new, though if you look at their YouTube channel, you can see they've been working on Shadow of the Road for 5 years, since they have videos of prototypes of various systems in the game all the way from 2019. If you're interested in looking at those, I'll put the link to their channel in the description too. It seems to me like these are very passionate devs who know what they're doing, and Owlcat just so happened to find them and their project, which I think is great. I was originally going to say that it isn't likely to see Shadow of the Road releasing at the end of 2025 or early 2026, but frankly, the demo is really solid, the game's already in alpha stage, and clearly they're already looking for player feedback so they can adjust and improve the systems they have in place. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the game releasing sometime in early 2026. It can be different for every developer, sure, but as far as I've seen for various games I followed in the past, the alpha stage doesn't last all that long, maybe a year or so, and then beta lasts even less than that, since at that point it's all about polish and bug fixing. Obviously, this is just my own speculation based on what I personally know about game development from my previous game tester jobs, and also general interest in the field. Delays can always happen, of course, but I'm excited to play the game, so can you blame me that I'm hoping it releases sooner rather than later? Just a little warning, if you decide to play the demo, alpha builds of games are still fairly unfinished. They reached a point at which they have all the basic systems in place, but there can still be placeholder and lower fidelity assets, missing elements that aren't considered essential and which will be added later, unbalanced systems, and so on. I'm just telling you this because I know sometimes players get disappointed when they play an early version of a game. This isn't the type of demo you play in Steam Next Fest when games are very close to release and the demo is just there to get people excited. So if you give the demo a try, I recommend focusing on the basic feel and gameplay that's there to get a sense of how much you'd enjoy the game in its final, polished form. Personally, I think the game already feels quite polished for alpha. I didn't really encounter any major bugs other than a cutscene that had the wrong subtitles, and in combat having to sometimes select and then deselect an ability so that the movement grid shows up. Oh yeah, and another possible bug related to a dialogue choice counting towards the wrong character path. These are quite minor bugs in my opinion though, and they didn't negatively impact my enjoyment of the demo. Certainly I've seen this kind of thing even in released titles. But anyway, your mileage may vary, so this is why I wanted to warn you about what alpha means. Before we get into my thoughts on the demo and Shadow of the Road in general, I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining the channel as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated, but not required. I am always thankful, even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. Back to the demo. So what exactly do you get to experience in the demo? The story begins with our first 2 characters having lost a battle against the Emperor's forces and becoming Ronin, which are disgraced rogue samurai to my understanding. You choose some dialogue options which seem to have consequences for character and relationship development, and are then thrust into your first combat encounter. You only control the 2 characters for now, Satoru, the serious sword-focused samurai, and Akira, the more free and emotive albino archer. As far as tutorial battles go, it's actually on the hard side because it involves a bunch of enemies with guns and lots of areas they can run to hide and reload or take cover behind. I do think it's a great battle though, because it highlights how the environment is an important part, how it's better to plan your movement ahead a little bit since you don't want to be too far to be able to attack someone and thus waste a turn, how certain objects in the world can be destroyed to remove cover. It helps to have both a melee and ranged character in your party, and having only 2 party members lets you get used to how combat works so that you can learn to use other types of abilities later on. After the battle is over, your characters speak to an important figure working for the Shogun, the more religious-aligned man who opposes the tech-aligned emperor. This man offers your 2 characters a chance to regain their honor by serving the Shogun, and sends them on a mission to retrieve a young boy who is apparently of utmost importance to the war. Afterwards, you are free to explore the area around the estate, find some items and a side quest, and then continue on with the main quest, arriving at the estate where the boy is. You interact with the master of the house, who is an old tit, then get to the boy only to be attacked by ninjas, who actually seem to have some kind of magical ability that lets them phase through the ground. It's weird, but it kind of works with the setting and also allows for ninjas to get reinforcements without it being weird for extra enemies to appear out of nowhere, so I respect it. After fighting off one group of ninjas, you make your way to the front of the estate where the old tit is yelling insults at the attackers, but also yelling insults about the young boy and his mother, at which point, the boy gets really upset and becomes possessed by a demon. The old tit is very satisfyingly used to form the parts of a horrifying demon creature that attacks everything in sight, including your party. You have to fight off the attackers as well as the demon while the boy is in a weird catatonic state floating in the air, and also occasionally sending waves of healing to your nearby party members for some reason. I assume the whole demon possession powers thing is the reason why the Shogun wants the boy on his side in the war. The demo ends after you're done with the fight, and the characters decide to take the boy to a nearby monastery since he's still in a catatonic state after his demonic outburst. It's not a cliffhanger, which I appreciate, because I think this particular ending made me far more interested to find out what happens next, despite not being a super high-intensity moment to end on. It took me an hour to finish the demo, including exploring the area around the estate. In my first playthrough, I couldn't finish the side quest to inform someone at the estate about the dead merchant, because I didn't notice the NPC I was supposed to talk to. The icon that showed he was interactable was too small. But I went back and was glad to see that I had the option to restart the mission, and walked around the estate to figure out who I was supposed to talk to and finally found him. I thought it was a nice little side quest that felt satisfying to complete and which added something to the overall feeling of the story and setting. So if these are the kinds of side quests we'll see in the full game, I'm very happy with that. As long as there aren't any meaningless fetch quests, it's good. Overall, I enjoyed my time with the demo far more than I thought I would. This is because I am generally not a fan of turn-based combat, but Shadow of the Road has a much better combat system than other turn-based RPGs I've tried before and gave up on, so that's what we'll talk about next. In combat, you control a party of characters in a turn-based system, which certainly sounds standard, but what I really appreciate about Shadow of the Road's combat are 2 main elements. First, every character in your party has a different skill tree with unique abilities, which means that they fulfill certain roles in the party and feel different enough, which makes each character's turn more fun to play. Second, and perhaps even more importantly, characters are limited to 5 active abilities they can use in combat. This is a huge positive because frankly, the main reason I despise turn-based combat in most RPGs is the extremely unwieldy nature of it that comes from having access to far too many different abilities and far too many categories and using far too many types of resources. In Shadow of the Road, you have a simple yet effective system. Each character has movement points and action points. You can use them however you wish during your character's turn, moving on the battlefield and using various abilities. Abilities are going to cost you a certain amount of action points. In the demo, it was 1 action point for simpler or weaker abilities and 2 for more powerful ones. There is also a different kind of ability that functions on a cooldown rather than by using up your ability points. The cooldown abilities I saw in the demo were either counting down how many enemies were killed or else how many turns that character had gone through since last activating the ability. And finally, you have consumable items that do things like heal your character or enhance the power of their next ability, as well as likely other effects that we'll see in the full game. You can put the consumables on a quick item bar for each character and use them in combat, seemingly without costing an action point, though I'm not 100% sure because I only needed to use a healing item once. You can make a decision about what actions to take fairly quickly since you have such a small focused group of possible actions. The tactical thinking you have to do is kept for the fun stuff instead of wrangling what could have been an overloaded UI full of icons. The fun stuff being looking at the battlefield, what objects you can take cover behind or destroy if you want to remove cover, the positions of your characters and the enemies, your characters and enemies' health bars, what abilities enemies may be preparing, or if they're reloading their gun, and so on. I am generally speaking someone who will absolutely go on record and say that I hate turn-based combat, but in Shadow of the Road, I don't hate it. It's actually kind of fun. And for me to say that, you have to understand that is glowing praise. I couldn't get more than a few hours into a bunch of the big CRPGs out there simply because the UI was extremely user-unfriendly. I had way too many choices to make between so many abilities, and overall it made every single battle, even against super simple enemies, take ages because my ADHD brain can't handle so many different possible choices and I get stuck in choice paralysis. Plus, tiny icons in the UI that look colorful and flashy don't actually tell me at a glance what the ability does, so in those games I had to spend so much time hovering over the icons to remember which ability that was and what it did. With Shadow of the Road, you have a nice, clean UI that doesn't take up more space than it needs to, and lets you see a lot of the battlefield, which is really important. The ability icons aren't crowded because overall you only have a maximum of 5 for each character, and because you only have those 5 abilities, you will very quickly learn them and remember which is which, what they do, and much more easily decide on what actions to take on your character's turn. By the way, I completely understand that this is my personal experience with CRPGs and TRPGs as someone with ADHD, and it's possible that you personally prefer having a million icons and attacks and spells and all sorts of things to choose from every turn. Maybe for you, Shadow of the Road having only 5 abilities per character seems too limiting. This is exactly why I recommend you play the demo for yourself, because what I think ultimately doesn't matter because you may have a completely different experience with the game than I do. There is also the matter of shifting to talk about. Combatants take turns in combat based on their speed, aka initiative, and you can see the order of turns in the timeline on the top of the screen. So far so good, this is a very common thing to see in turn-based games, and something I'm familiar with from playing D&D in real life. However, this initiative or speed can be affected by various abilities which shift initiative around and can push a character's turn to be farther away or pull a character's turn earlier on the timeline. I'm not entirely sure how the shifting mechanic is going to feel later on in the game, because these kinds of systems can encourage you to abuse them to ensure that your party gets as many turns as possible, while enemies constantly get denied turns by being delayed and/or killed. To be fair, this is something I see happen in D&D sessions, where the party's monk uses Stunning Strike on various enemies to get them to waste turns, shaking off the stun, or else you try to knock enemies down, cast Sleep or Slow on them, and so on to get them to skip an entire turn or multiple turns, or be unable to do as many actions during their turn as usual. And obviously, crowd control or disabling abilities are a thing in games with real-time combat, which are used in a very similar way. Since I'm not an expert in turn-based combat video games, I don't really have an opinion, positive or negative, towards this system. It certainly worked well in the demo, it was easy to understand, and I was able to get through all of the fights fairly easily. I'm not really sure that the shifting mechanic will force players into character builds that prioritize abilities that shift characters' initiative, because that's frankly a matter of gameplay balance, which isn't something that we can comment on at this early alpha stage. If the combat abilities will be properly balanced, it should be equally effective to specialize your DPS characters into doing a lot of damage so that they one-shot most enemies, and your other characters to fulfill their roles. If you do enough damage to kill enemies before they get a chance to take multiple turns due to using shifting abilities, it should be fine. The only complaints I have about combat is that it feels a bit slow to respond, and that you can't speed up enemy turns. What I mean by slow to respond is first that the transitions between turns take too long while the camera moves to the character whose turn it is, and then there's a bit of text that appears to denote when it's one of your character's turns, and only once that's done can you actually start doing stuff. Second, when you do click to either move, attack, or use an ability, there's a bit too much of a delay between when you click and when the action's animation starts. The speeding up enemy turns thing is something I imagine will likely be an option in the full game, but I thought I'd mention it here anyway as a bit of feedback for the devs. I definitely don't need to see the normal speed movement of enemies, since there's nothing I can do to interrupt them or something during their turns. As a player, I have no agency unless it's my turn, so I would really appreciate the option to speed up stuff that I have no control over. Before we move on from combat, I'll mention that so far the 4 different characters you get to use in the demo are Satoru, a melee samurai damage dealer, Akira, the archer damager, Ishida, the big beefy tank, and Asuke, who is the supernatural support character. You only get to level up Satoru and Akira once after you reach the estate, so in this demo you don't get to see much skill progression. There's only a few battles in total, so that makes sense, although it would have been nice to see a higher level battle as well just to get a feel for how that would look and play like. Speaking of progression, I noticed a distinct lack of equipable gear in this demo. In the character screens, you can see that there are some slots next to the weapons of each character. I'm not sure whether those will be used for upgrades, temporary bonuses, or some other kind of progression, but there does seem to be something related to gear in the character screens at least. I would assume there will be some kind of gear upgrades, something other than consumables that you'll be able to loot or purchase, since I don't think an RPG really feels RPG enough without some gear progression. Now, there's something very interesting to talk about, which is character progression, and I mean this both in a gameplay and story sense. Each party member seems to have a philosophical system, let's say. It reminds me a lot of the Paragon Renegade system in Mass Effect, which is both good and bad. Characters get some amount of points towards one of 2 paths whenever they make a particular decision in conversations and quests. I am unsure whether these paths will have gameplay effects or if they will only affect the story. It's not really explained anywhere in the demo, and it clearly looks like something that comes into play later on after you've made enough choices to gain a significant amount of points towards one particular path, or maybe both. The reason why I think this system may have gameplay effects is because it's shown at the bottom of the character's skill screen. Will certain abilities in the tree be gated behind having a certain amount of points towards the path that those abilities are related to? Will the character get certain bonuses and or penalties based on which path they follow? I don't know, but this kind of system definitely seems like it could affect a bunch of different things, not just the dialogue options you get offered or the way certain NPCs react to your character based on your previous choices and the expression of your path. I certainly like that each character has a conflict within them, pulling them between 2 sides, but at the same time I feel like maybe it lessens the impact of the system if every single party member has such a conflict. To be fair, there doesn't necessarily seem to be just one main character. Even though you start out with the 2 Ronin, Satoru and Akira, it's clear you'll get the rest of the party quite soon after that. And every character will likely play an important part in the story and have their own choices to make, so it makes sense to give them equal weight by having everyone using this Path X versus Path Y system. I'm concerned about these paths because I remember how Paragon and Renegade didn't work all that well in Mass Effect for me and quite a few other players. Now, I don't know exactly how this path system works in Shadow of the Road, but in a game like Mass Effect, this works best when you're pushing it to the extremes, if you're mostly choosing Paragon or mostly choosing Renegade options. However, you may be the kind of player who doesn't want to play a character so extreme. You may choose some nice options, some mean ones, and overall end up much closer to the middle or neutral part of the Paragon Renegade meter. Because of this, you won't get access to special Paragon or Renegade dialogue options that are locked behind having a certain score towards that specific extreme. I'm worried that this is something that might happen in Shadow of the Road too, even more so because a lot of the choices I've seen already in the demo feel far more subtle, human, and realistic, so they're even harder to choose between than the Paragon Renegade options. If it feels like it makes perfect sense for the character to choose either option, and you as the player don't quite know what to choose, that's great in terms of writing. It means they put a lot of thought into the dialogue and quest choices and made them feel meaningful. But on the other hand, if these same meaningful and nuanced choices are what gives you points towards Path X or Path Y, it's likely that many players will get points towards both paths. If the game is designed to respond only to certain thresholds of points in these paths, and not also to the more neutral or balanced versions of the philosophical meter, then it's going to feel like the game is less reactive to the player's choices. I'll give you some examples. Satoru has the path of the samurai versus the path of the Ronin. I think this character more than anything will be quite difficult for players to mainly just choose one path and stick with it, because at times it makes practical sense or seems like a nice thing to do to act in the way of the samurai. But other times you just want to be nice to a friend, crack a joke, or make an exception, be lenient, or bend the rules. which leads Satoru to gain points towards the Ronin path. I think overall the Ronin path is more likely to happen on a first playthrough based on what I've seen in the demo, but even so, I only got a little bit more Ronin points than Samurai points. I would expect that by the end of the game, that balance between the two paths may still be a bit too close for the game to be able to react to it meaningfully. Akira has the cold-blooded versus warm-hearted paths. This one overall seems far easier for players to kind of mostly stick to one path. Most players will likely choose warm-hearted, though the edgy ones will obviously go with cold-blooded. Ishida has the path of awe versus the path of mirth. I noticed what is possibly a bug, which is that I chose a dialogue option for him to say the more serious, protective line of dialogue, and yet it gave him points towards the mirth path, when I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be awe. I'm not entirely sure what mirth versus awe means, since I only got to see him a little bit towards the end of the demo, but this certainly feels like far less of a duality than cold-blooded / warm-hearted or Ronin Samurai. I forgot to look in the character screen for Asuke to see what her paths are, but I think you get the point I was trying to make with the other characters. I hope it ends up working out, because I do like the idea behind it. Still part of character progression or development is another system, character relationships. I saw that certain choices made by Satoru and Akira in dialogue could get them to become closer or not to the other. Not really sure what this means overall, how much of an effect it'll have on the story, certain moments in the story, or perhaps just the way these characters talk to each other in conversations, but I certainly noticed it and color me intrigued. I'm very interested to see how character relationships affect stuff. Hell, there could even be gameplay effects based on the character's relationship, like certain buffs or debuffs, types of effects they may have on each other when doing various actions in combat. Don't know whether there can be any romance between any of these characters, but I'm definitely keeping my eyes peeled for that too. In terms of exploration, there's a very limited amount of it in the demo. You get to walk around an area and discover a side quest, find various items. The only ones of real value during the demo are the consumables, which you can use to heal your characters, but there were also some items that I assume are valuables which can be sold to a merchant, or possibly used for a quest later on, in the case of the strange device you find in the dead merchant's cart. From what I've seen, exploration feels like it would be fun, as long as there's a lot more of it. I like that I had choices I could make even in that side quest with the merchant's cart, which affected the character paths of Satoru and Akira, so I'm hoping that exploration in the full game will be just as rewarding, either through special items, interesting interactions, or additional consequences like alterations to character paths, character reactions, and so on. As a little note, I love how lootable items are highlighted by the game. Whenever you walk close enough to a lootable item, there's this little explosion of sakura petals, which looks magical, kind of like you have a secret little yokai or other magical creature following you around who is trying to help you notice these things. Moving on to the story. Unfortunately, since this is just a demo, I can't say very much about the overall narrative, since I only got to see a tiny bit of it. There is a strong foundation of history here, dealing with the political situation in Japan at that time, with a conflict between the emperor and the shogunate, but at the same time is combined with fantasy elements like actual magical abilities, demons, steampunk tech, and so on. I always love fantasy more than anything, so I'm very happy with the way they've enhanced the historical inspiration. It works really well because they leaned into things that were already there, such as guns existing at the same time as samurai, and of course, various legends and creatures from Japanese folklore and mythology. The dialogue writing is really good. I found all the characters I interacted with to be compelling, even if they were nasty, and even if they just had a few lines of dialogue and a tiny interaction, like the guard you can speak to about the dead merchant. Based on what I've seen in the demo, I'm expecting the story to be a real highlight of this game, and the main reason why I'm excited to play it when it releases. The only thing somewhat related to the story that I have to complain about is that you can't skip cutscenes. When I played through the final mission a second time so I could finish the dead merchant quest, it felt frustrating that I couldn't skip the cutscenes I had just watched a little bit ago. Again, similar to my complaint about not being able to speed up enemy turns, I imagine that adding the option to skip cutscenes is something they'll implement for the full game. But just in case, I wanted to add this here as part of my feedback for the devs. In conclusion, despite my dislike for turn-based combat, Shadow of the Road is actually an RPG that I'm looking forward to playing. The story is really interesting, the characters and their interactions seem to be well thought out with systems that are meant to react to player choices and offer meaningful reactivity and consequences. The setting is fascinating. I'm always a sucker for anything with fantasy elements, and to me it seems like they've done a great job of mixing Japanese history and mythology. And even the combat, which I went into expecting to hate, was actually pretty good. So yeah, Shadow of the Road is absolutely a game going on my wishlist, which I'll be excited to finally play when it launches. Even if the combat ends up being meh for me, as long as the story is just as good as what I saw in this demo, it's more than worth it. I hope you enjoyed this early look at Shadow of the Road. I certainly did. If you're looking forward to more videos about games I like, do remember to subscribe, and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been BG Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.